Why, yes, I did make this intro. Thank you for noticing. It sucks. Fuck you. So I'm sure the majority of you have heard by now about the end of the podcast, Hot Wet Soup, with the final episode being an outing of the well-respected figure in the commentary community, Zaptie. Now personally, I have mixed feelings about the video. I don't think that it was toned correctly, the information was poorly relayed, and the core of the message was danced around with how they felt about the situation, instead of what the audience really needed to know. That's why I think the video is getting the response that it is. Well, that mixed with a few of the tweets that came out after the fact, which we'll get into a bit later. So first, let me say that I don't know anything about sociopathy aside from the definition that I just looked up. A sociopath is a person with a personality disorder manifesting itself in extreme antisocial attitudes and behaviors and a lack of conscience. However, even though that seems to be where the emphasis is for most people, I don't think labeling him as a sociopath really matters. I think the term was more being used as a reasoning for the things that he does or did. In my eyes, it bears little relevance as to what the actual meat of the podcast was about. It's just a term that gives context as to how he could have done some of the things that he's done. And I feel like people are having a hard time getting past whether or not he's a sociopath or not. Personally, I don't care. Next, let's go ahead and determine why this podcast was made. I know a lot of videos that I've seen have been suggesting that it might just be a publicity stunt for Bionic Pig, Elvis, and I'm Alex, but I think that's a pretty stupid conclusion. For one thing, this video is not monetized, they're getting no money off the situation, and even if they were, Zaptie apparently has the reins to the finances, so it's pretty illogical. As for it being a plea for exposure, it just doesn't really seem to line up unless they're just getting extremely greedy out of nowhere. Bionic Pig is probably the most debatable since he's the smallest channel, but he's been growing a lot over the past few weeks. He said on January 4th, 40k by February, and it's now February and he's currently at 50k. Elvis is at almost 142,000, and I'm Alex has been growing extremely fast for about a month now. So none of them are in dire straits for exposure at the moment, at least not in my mind. Some other people might be saying that they wanted to ruin Zaptie's appearance. I can't really combat that response, but I don't really see much reasoning for them to do so. They were all on Zaptie's good side as far as I can tell, plus Zaptie has less subscribers than two of them, and I just don't really see much of a reasoning to it personally. I don't really see the benefit. So disregarding those two opinions, let's dig into what I think they were trying to convey with the podcast and why they did it so poorly. So pretty much the first thing that they did was label Zaptie as a sociopath.
Ed told me about 4 or 5 days ago now that he was a diagnosed sociopath.
Now, I'm not going to argue whether or not he's a sociopath, as I stated, but I am going to give a little bit more context to it. This was not I'm Alex saying that Zaptie is for 100% fact a sociopath. This was I'm Alex saying that Zaptie told him that he was a sociopath and how that definition fits in well with the various things that Zaptie has done in his opinion. Now, like I said, people get stuck on the labeling. It was kind of a stupid starting point for the podcast in my opinion, and it did really seem like they were trying to push that label, but this is third-hand information at this point from what I can tell. After Zaptie had cheated on the girl they discussed in the video, I think that was the reasoning, or maybe just his depression, he or they decided it would be good for him to go see a therapist.
And he goes, all right, I feel like I should tell you, I went to my therapist's, and 2 weeks ago, she diagnosed me as a sociopath.
He went to the therapist and they diagnosed him with sociopathy, allegedly, but the point is, the term is kind of baseless. It doesn't really mean anything on its own. It's just a justification as to how or why he could have done some of the things that he did. But the next big point is one that I think a lot of people overlook.
Friends of mine had managed to guess off of situations that we had managed to keep quiet.
Now, I think this is the biggest reason that they actually decided to make this video. They were attempting to make this video to cushion the blow for their friend. As I'm Alex says, people he knew were already being able to guess of some of Zaptie's wrongdoings, and if the right person found out, they could have really made Zaptie look a lot worse. So they decided to try and cut it off before it got there. Now, did they do a good job of it? Again, I don't really think that they did, but we'll get back to that later.
That Ed had been cheating on multiple people for the longest time.
Now, this point is interesting, as I expected it to have much more of a backlash for Zaptie, but it seems like the majority of people are like, fuck those e-girls. And to an extent, I get that, since I'm Alex, Bionic Pig, and Elvis painted it as a huge deal as the anchor to their outing of him, really. But they kind of dance around why it's important. They hint at it here.
Also, all these people knew him from his YouTube channel, which is also important because as YouTubers, he is coming from a position of severe power and these girls looked up to him.
But it's important because of his position. It's not important because he's trying to fuck multiple girls. This is a YouTuber preying on younger girls that are fans of him, and thus they are more willing to do things that might be questionable to their judgment, if that makes sense to you. These are girls that are fans of Zaptie, and he's toying around with them, telling them what they want to hear. The girls are blinded by his YouTube fame, and that's where the issue comes in, I think. Or at least I think that's what they were trying to convey with this. But they kind of just glaze over it, so it's hard to tell what kind of relationship Zaptie and most of these girls truly had, so I can understand the skepticism. This point also plays into this point.
One hand texting Sabrina, he's like, well, she's not going to kill herself, so that's okay. And I'm looking at him like, how can you have this reaction? Like, how can you?
This is important because it shows Zaptie as being detached from the situation in which he should have really cared. He supposedly had feelings for this girl, they had been dating, and here she is about to commit suicide, and he's extremely detached from the actual situation, and that pushes Alex into believing him when he says that he's a sociopath. Another thing that I want to take note of is Alex's telling of the situation absolutely sucks. It's extremely confusing and muddled. I thought the first time I listened to it that Zaptie was playing golf with this girl who was about to commit suicide. Now I think that the bleeped out name here...
Now, what happened was, messages me, we're all playing golf with your friends. Me, Ed, and a few other YouTubers.
Is actually referencing another person, and the name of the person, depending on if it would be a girlfriend, is relatively important because it could make Zaptie's cheating more than just be on e-girls if he actually knew one of the girls in real life. But since they bleeped out the name, all these girls just seem like they're online fans he's manipulating. The final thing they talked about was Zaptie's manipulation and deception. This is where the trio spent the majority of the discussion, and that's the base of the problem with the podcast. But for a quick summary of some of the given examples would be Zaptie saying something to someone and then telling someone else something different, or using people who thought that they were his friends in order to get bigger on YouTube. Now the issue with this is it's extremely difficult to say for 100% certainty that he wasn't just trying to network with these people as many YouTubers are akin to doing. And the proof given is he ignored Bionic Pig after presumably they were becoming best friends, talked behind Elvis's back to gain some favor in the community, and became good friends with I'm Alex since he was having significant growth. None of these instances at their core say that Zaptie is a sociopath. They can be explained away very easily. Bionic Pig said something to Zaptie that made him mad, or maybe Zaptie was just busy or something. Maybe Zaptie genuinely didn't like Elvis's video. Maybe Zaptie just got to be friends with Alex at a convenient time. It's hard to outright say that these things happened because Zaptie is a sociopath. But unfortunately, that's where the bulk of the podcast was spent, on how they couldn't really trust Zaptie because these things happened and they make him seem like a dick. Plus, this isn't a point that's going to affect many people. The only people that it's going to affect are the people who are wanting to become friends with Zaptie, and Zaptie would see them as beneficial to him. So basically, a bigger content creator. This point isn't going to affect people who are just viewers of his content, and it's hard to really make them relate. Now that we've gotten what I consider to be the major points of the video out of the way, here's why I think the podcast fails. It paints Zaptie in a very malicious light without bringing the proper examples to really make the audience understand why. The majority of the podcast is spent on them relating it back to themselves and how it affects them, but at no point did they describe anything sounding like this.
But due to the fact that he could be super dangerous and he has done things in the past which are unforgivable,
they toned it like Zaptie was a huge villain, a sociopath, but the evidence given just makes him seem like a bit of a dick. He cheated on girls, which is a very dick thing to do, but it's hard to say that he's a sociopath for it. He manipulated and used them under the guise of being their friend. Again, a dick thing to do, but the proof given is not damning enough to paint him as a sociopath. The worst thing I think he did was act detached when the girl was attempting suicide, and that is worrying, but this is a recount from I'm Alex, and it wasn't even the focus of what they mainly talked about, it was just kind of a talking point that they didn't really elaborate on. So in conclusion, I think they painted him as way too much of a villain for the examples they gave. The point of the video seemed mainly to explain the ending of Hot Wet Soup, warn people about giving Zaptie huge amounts of trust, and cut off rumors that may have trickled down to someone who wanted to really make the claims huge and paint Zaptie in an even worse light than this video did. But they really didn't elaborate on anything very well, so it's a difficult sell, and that's why I think they're getting the backlash that they are. But that's not all, because I'm Alex decided to tweet things like this after the fact, displaying some of the most hypocritical bullshit I think I've ever fucking seen. So you're going to tell people that you're going to attempt to ruin their career if they make a video about Zaptie when you've literally made a career out of talking shit on other YouTubers, the majority of whom have done less than Zaptie has if everything you've said is to be taken at face value. Go fuck yourself. Number one, you brought this to the public, so you have absolutely no ground to stand on. Number two, you're not the fucking high council of YouTube. You don't decide what people talk about and what people don't. So don't even start with this bullshit. Just because he's your friend doesn't give him or you a double standard to negate any kind of criticism. Anyways, that's the video, guys. Like it, don't like it, let me know. I made this video because this situation is interesting, and also, I want to spite anyone that said you shouldn't make a video about it because they're hypocrites. Even if they took it back, it shouldn't have even crossed their minds to threaten it. Also, people saying that they shouldn't have made this episode, I kind of disagree. I don't think they should have made it like this, because what they were trying to convey was very poorly done in my opinion. They were presumably trying to convey this in a way that would cut off people who may have found out these things in the future, explain why people, including themselves, shouldn't trust Zaptie, and announce that the podcast was ending. But instead, it kind of just came across as Zaptie is a terrible person for reasons A, B, and C, none of which were very well elaborated upon, and thus it was just kind of a hard sell. And before we end it, this story isn't over because allegedly, Zaptie sent out and received nudes from an underage girl. I don't know that this changes the context of what I was saying because I was kind of just critiquing their podcast, but it certainly gives more credence that this podcast needed to be made and that they needed to tell people not to trust him. This comes from Deodor Anthony, who posted about it last night, and unless the images have been doctored, they seem pretty damning. But take it with a grain of salt because as far as I know, it's not 100% proof. But if it is true, not only will he have been manipulating underage girls, but he'll also be a hypocrite. Shark pride for life, bruh.